Simeon's story. An eyewitness account of the kidnapping of Emmett Till. Foreword. By Herb Boyd. I first met Simeon right in 2002, when filmmaker Keith Beecham was traveling around the country previewing his documentary The Untold Story of Emmett Louis Till. At each place in the New York area where the film was screened, New York University, the United Nations, and the Film Forum, Simeon, and sometimes his wife, Annie, helped Keith promote his film about the tragic death of Simeon's cousin. During one of those visits, Simeon and I talked extensively about the incident and how it had affected him over the years, and especially now that the film was getting such good notices. Simeon confessed to me that without Keith's persistence he never would have been part of the project, since he holds bitter memories about other attempts to capture his cousin's story. So many lies, distortions, and inaccuracies about Till's death had accumulated over the years that Simeon had become increasingly upset and had begged off when writers, reporters, and filmmakers tried to involve him in recounting what had happened that fateful morning years ago. Even I was beginning to sense that I was annoying him with my questions during my interviews with him after the screenings, but I was mistaken. He assured me that Keith had done a good job and he felt a bit more willing to talk about the murder and the cousin he called Bobo. "What about telling your own version of what happened and not be part of somebody else's project?" I asked him. "Well, I'll have to think about it," he said, and his old reluctance to reveal his innermost feelings crept into our conversation. Several weeks, if not months, went by, and I hadn't heard from Simeon, when Keith said that he wanted to speak to me. They had been together at one of the events in Mississippi in honor of Till when Simeon expressed a desire to talk to me. I called him immediately, and he said, thanks to his wife's badgering, he was ready to write his autobiography. Annie, my co-conspirator, had quietly talked to me about a possible book on Simeon's life, but I had seen those moments as merely fun and games between us, nothing resembling a secret attempt to get him to commit. Anyway, her cajoling and pleading finally pushed Simeon to the point where he was ready to put his memories down on paper. It was time to set the record straight, he said. When we finally got down to business, I had just completed a book on the civil rights movement with Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee, and so the Emmett Till case was fresh on my mind again. I was a teenager when Till was brutally murdered in Mississippi, only 2 years older than he was, and it was hard for me even to look at his battered face that appeared in photos circulated by my mother's friends and neighbors. All I can remember of those days is that my mother seemed to be grateful that she had found the means and wherewithal to spirit my brother and me out of the South. Not having daily contact with the white world, my friends and I in the ghettos of Detroit were stunned to learn that Till had been killed for merely whistling at a white woman. It gave us pause, but we felt secure, since we were assured that something like that could never happen in the North, and especially not in Detroit. Working with Simeon and listening to him recall his childhood in Mississippi and his youth near Chicago reminded me of my early years. I was born in Birmingham, Alabama, but spent the first years of my life outside Tuskegee in a tiny enclave called Cotton Valley. Simeon left the South when he was 12, my mother got us out of Dixie when I was 4. So his memories of the South are much sharper than any I can conjure. This is Simeon's story, and it is one I believe he could have written without me. But I like to think that my coaxing, goading, and pushing him deeper into his memories played at least a small part in getting the book completed. As many of us know, memory is not the most reliable of our faculties. Part of my responsibility was to help him pinpoint certain moments and to put them in historical and political context. I was aware of Simeon's concern that the book be his and not the ruminations of a ghostwriter seeking a way to tell his own story. Occasionally I have imposed my ideas on Simeon, but only in those instances where a little more backstory, statistics, or additional research enriches a passage. Otherwise, this is Simeon's story, his narrative, and I think he's done a marvelous job exhuming thoughts and events that must have been painful to relive. Sure, he had talked about those episodes, both publicly and privately, but now he had to put things down on paper, which is never an easy task. Even so, Simeon is a storyteller of the highest order, and it has been a pleasure journeying with him back over the years and, in a literary manner, meeting those friends and relatives whom I now count among my extended family. I came to really know Bobo and the world that shaped him and Simeon. To a great extent that world hasn't changed that much, though I leave the judgment to you after you've read Simeon's story. Simeon saw his cousin taken from his family, never to return. His story should have a special resonance for readers both young and old. As he looks back on this tragic moment in his childhood, We hope that you can identify with the trauma he experienced and understand why what happened years ago in Mississippi is still an important chapter in our nation's history.